Hola a todos and welcome to Getting Started with Calico Comics. My name is Haley Ziegler and I am the curriculum director here at Calico Spanish. So by the end of this video, you will start to understand the purpose of using Calico Comics with learners. We also are going to discuss some best practices to utilize when teaching a Calico comic to learners and how you can differentiate our activities and the actual teaching of the comic for different proficiency levels and age levels. So first, let's dive into the purpose of a Calico comic. First, the purpose is to provide comprehensible input. We do that by recycling Spanish vocabulary taught in each unit of Calico Spanish. We do this by utilizing visuals, cognates, and familiar context. So translation is needed very minimally, but ideally not at all. And the difficulty of the actual language in the comic increases with the pace of the curriculum. So learners are only exposed to the language that they have had ample amounts of lessons and recycling and just overall exposure to. They're only going to see what they could know at each in each comic, depending on where they're at in the curriculum. So we also utilize, like I said, the same vocabulary, but it's in a new context. So this allows learners to have exposure to the same vocabulary that they have learned in the curriculum with the help of video stories, flashcards, and activity sheets, but in a new context. So we like to say a good example is that when we teach colors, our colors don't just live in the color unit. So you're not going to just find thematic units in Calico where one unit teaches colors and the next unit teaches numbers, because what tends to happen is then those themes don't make it out of that unit again and they're not recycled. And that's also not how we learn our first language. We are exposed to ample amounts of language when we are young, and we want our second language to be taught in that same manner. So this is an example from Level B, Unit 7 in the comic Nuestras Mascotas. So just on this page, I can see that this vocabulary has been recycled from multiple units from previous levels of Calico Spanish. So, for example, tiene and tengo are actually first introduced in Level A, Unit 2, but it's coming back up again here in B7. Me gusta comes up from A6. Rojo is from the song Colores, Colores. So, actually, at this point in the unit or in the curriculum, Rojo hasn't actually been explicitly taught, meaning that we haven't included it as a flashcard in the Calico Spanish curriculum. However, it's come up multiple times when we're asking kids, what's your favorite color? And you're looking at the colors poster. The song Colores, Colores is sung a lot in levels A and level B, where Rojo is repeated constantly throughout the song. And then this comic also is reinforcing vocabulary from the current unit. So one of the things would be mascota, pájaro, amster, a hamster is one of the other ones. It's not on this page, but they are talking all about their pets and their family members in this unit and also throughout this level. So again, lots of recycling and reinforcing of vocabulary. So now we're going to talk about best practices when utilizing and teaching a Calico comic. So we're going to talk about that in the context of pre-reading, during reading, and post-reading activities. So when we are talking about pre-reading best practices, we are talking about what you need to do as the instructor to prepare your learners to understand the comic. So this can come in a variety of ways. So you can pre-teach and review core vocabulary. We have that through the comic vocabulary poster. You can discuss the theme or setting, make predictions, and then also explore characters in the story. Guys, this is just 4 of really an endless amount of activities that you can do to help learners prepare to read the comic. But we're going to first look at the pre-teaching vocabulary. So we're going to look at Level B, Unit 4. This comic is actually has a part 1 and a part 2. So this comic is called Quiero Correr. And if you look on the left, that is what the vocabulario looks like for the comic. So there is a poster, and learners are either seeing a review of the vocabulary that was in that unit, or there might be a few new things. So for example, zapateria is new, mainly because part 1 of this comic takes place in a zapateria. So when you go through and pre-teach this vocabulary, one of the activities provided is a vocabulary activity sheet. So for this unit, we are asking learners to look at the word, put it in a complete sentence, and then draw a photo. Now, if you are dealing and working with very young learners, it may be very unrealistic for them to put a word in a complete sentence. However, it might not be unrealistic for you to ask them to draw a picture that represents the word comprar. So comprar means to buy. And once they know that, ask them to draw something that shows comprar in action. The other thing that you can keep in mind is when we're asking them to write a complete sentence, we actually want them to look for that word in the text and put that word in a sentence utilizing the text. If you are working with native speakers, those learners, they may be able to put it in a complete sentence on their own without the text, but our second language learners are definitely going to need support with that. But that's just one of the ways that you can differentiate this activity. If you find that it's not an age-appropriate or level-appropriate activity, you're completely fine to forego it and replace it with something that you find to be best for your learners. And then finally, we do have our Level B Unit 4 flashcards. These are great to review and go over because all of those words are going to be recycled throughout the story. The next thing that we recommend is discussing the theme and the setting. So in this comic, like I mentioned earlier, it does take place in a shoe store, in a zapateria. So one of the things that you could do is you could ask learners to brainstorm what are some zapaterias that they are familiar with. You could think of Nike, Foot Locker, shoe department. There are quite, depending on where you live, you might also have some local zapaterias. This story also takes place in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro. And you could talk about, you could show them real life pictures of the Christ the Redeemer statue. You could take a look at the geography. We always include a map of the location of the country. And so you can help learners kind of immerse themselves and think, okay, where might my characters be in real life? If they were really in Rio de Janeiro, what does that look like? Next, we have a making predictions activity. We have learners make predictions about the story often. Making predictions is a really core component of many state standards. When we're talking about the Common Core standards for ELA, and also when we're talking about language acquisition standards. So one of the activities here for this comic is called Quien va a ganar. So this comic involves the characters running a race. And so they have to make predictions about who is going to come in first, second, and third place. So we do provide them an activity sheet to keep track of their predictions. Then you can also discuss the characters. So one of the great things about a Calico comic is that not only is our vocabulary recycled, but so are our characters. So our characters are able to really have some character development. We're able to learn that Pedro es el pez azul, Pepe es el perro marrón. We know how old they are. They're able to describe them, who their friends are, what they like to do. And that becomes really important because as our comics develop and continue on throughout each level, we do try to build on those previous characteristics that were developed in previous comics. So now we're going to talk about during reading best practices. So during reading, we're asking that you go slow and repeat, that you ask clarifying questions to check comprehension, and to utilize the illustrations and the vocabulary poster. So one of the things is we ask that you go slow and repeat. So not only do we want you to go slow through each lesson, we also want you to go slow as you're reading. And we'll look at some different ways what that looks like. But just in this particular unit, in this lesson, there's 3 opportunities to read a comic in one lesson plan. Now, if you're like, okay, wait a second, I don't have that much time. I don't know that I can do that. That's fine. That's fine. You make it work for what you can do in your time frame and constraints. But we also have some people who get to meet with their learners for 45 minutes a day, which isn't that the dream? I mean, that's what we all would want, right? But just in this lesson, there's 3 opportunities to read a comic in this lesson plan. And in one of those opportunities, there is an opportunity to do a dialogic reading where you're asking clarifying questions. So as you're going through the comic a second time, you're able to ask learners questions about the story. Now, if your learners are very novice, you may need to do some of this in the shared language. However, it is possible to ask clarifying questions in the target language, and I'll show some examples on the next slide. This is also an opportunity to ask questions to help them connect to the story. In this one, have they ever been in a music store? Does this story remind them of anything? Have learners ever asked a friend to teach them how to do something? Do they know how to play a guitar? So when we're looking at clarifying questions, some of these might be just on who is in the story and what are they like. Okay, so you could point to Dante and ask, ¿Se llama Dante? ¿Sí o no? ¿Es un pez o un elefante? ¿Es azul o morado? You can point to Pedro and ask, ¿Se llama Pedro? ¿Es azul o morado? ¿Es un pez o un elefante? So as you're doing that, you're able to see, okay, are learners understanding the words and then the context in which they appear? You can also do that by utilizing the illustrations and the vocabulary poster. So the vocabulary poster, those are the core words that we want you to circle or to repeat and make sure learners are acquiring, okay? So we have pez and elefante, okay? Una guitarra, la música, and enseña, okay? Enseña is teach. That might be one of the hard ones for your learners to really understand. Number one, it is not a cognate, okay, so it does not look familiar or sound familiar to a word in English, and the rest of them are. So one of the things I could do is I could look at this image of Pedro holding the music sheet, and I could point and I could say, Pedro enseña, okay, la música. Enseña a tocar la guitarra. Okay, enseña a tocar la guitarra. You could point to yourself and say, yo enseño la clase. Okay, if I want to recycle guitarra and la música, I can look at the next picture. You could say, en la foto hay 2 guitarras. Pedro tiene una guitarra amarilla. Dante tiene una guitarra azul. Hay una guitarra, 2 guitarras. So again, is you can do a picture talk, discuss as much about the images as you are able to in Spanish, and see if your learners can even if it's just labeling that image, utilizing that vocabulary, that is completely fine too. After reading best practices. So these are just 3 of, again, probably endless amounts of activities that you can do after reading. A great one to use when you're trying to differentiate this for younger learners, is maybe ones that aren't quite ready to write words, is to do a collaboration mural. So give them a section. So you're going to put them in groups. You're going to have them have a section of the story. You want to make sure that they understand what's happening in that section, and you're going to have them draw a picture that represents what is going on in their specific section of the story. So when everyone finishes drawing, you have them bring their illustration to the front of the class, and if they're able, they can read the section of their story aloud while presenting their illustration. You can also take their illustrations and you can put them up as you are retelling. If you're like, that might still be too difficult for my learners, just ask them to draw their favorite parts of the story together. The next activity that you can do is sequencing. So this is an example from level C, our Tengo Hambre comic in Unit 4. There are sentence strips that learners will cut out, and they have to organize them in the order in which they occur in the story. You can also do this with images. So all of our comics come as a PDF. So what you could do is you could actually cut out the comic squares and have learners organize the images with the text if they need the image support. If you think, okay, I think we can do it without the illustrations, then the activity provided is the way to go. And then lastly, one of our favorite things to do is act it out. So this is an example from level C, Unit 4, where we ask learners to act out and model ordering food at a restaurant. And they would have seen this time and time again in the unit, and they also saw it again in the comic. So we have a menu template, and we also have sentence starters to help them in that conversation. All right, so that's really getting started with Calico Comics. If you are interested in learning more, or you need to get your hands on Calico Comics, all of our comics are included in a Calico Spanish subscription. You can purchase printed comics, so physical comic books, on our Calico Spanish website. And if you have any other questions or would like a quote to provide to your district, you can email us at support@calicospanish.com for a quote.